Brian David Marshall here at the news desk at Pro Tour Aether Revolt in Dublin, Ireland. I am joined by Ian Duke. Ian, we're going to talk about Standard. We've had 3 weekends, part of a weekend so far here, but 3 weekends of Standard with Aether Revolt legal in the format, and what we've seen here at this tournament kind of reflects all 3 of those weekends individually, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's definitely one way to think of it. 5 rounds of Standard under our belt, of course. We've gotten to see what the pros brought here to the Pro Tour, and then a little bit of how that kind of shook out over the first half of our Standard rounds.
Well, let's start out with what we could call our week 1 deck.
Okay.
And that's Black-Green Constrictor. What is going on with these Black-Green decks? 3 new cards from Aether Revolt, taking center stage.
Yeah, so before we jump into the exact cards here, Black-Green decks, traditionally, they're about playing the highest individual card quality. Usually they're not about putting together these huge synergies. It's just kind of like nuts and bolts, big green creatures, black removal spells, that kind of a thing. Here, these particular Black-Green decks of this particular Standard season, there actually is a lot of synergy involved. And you can see here on this, with these 3 cards here, Winding Constrictor is really the core of this deck, and it has a lot of synergy with a number of other cards here. We see Walking Ballista, able to benefit from the extra +1/+1 counters that you get from Winding Constrictor. In particular, when you pay that 4 mana to add an additional +1/+1 counter to Walking Ballista, if you have Winding Constrictor in play, you actually get 2 additional +1/+1 counters. Kind of lets you machine gun down your opponent's creatures. On top of that, you've got Rishkar, Pima Renegade, another fantastic new card from Aether Revolt. Distributes +1/+1 counters on your other creatures, gets powered up by Winding Constrictor. Even if it doesn't, it represents a tremendous amount of mana acceleration. Just a really, really powerful core package here for this deck.
Especially, I guess, if you're activating your Walking Ballista, that extra mana can start to get really out of hand. On maybe a stalled board state, you start tapping your creatures at the end of your opponent's turn, and you're putting multiple counters on Walking Ballista.
Yeah, absolutely true. And even if you play the Walking Ballista after the Rishkar, it still benefits from Rishkar's ability because it comes in with +1/+1 counters on it.
All right, well, let's keep moving through this deck and take a look at some of the relics from Standard before Aether Revolt came in that are shining here.
Yeah, and this is where you get a little bit of flexibility. Sylvan Advocate can be a number of different 2-drops. In particular, Sylvan Advocate is one of the more popular ones because of the vigilance there. Works really, really well with Rishkar. But, we've seen Gifted Aetherborn, for example. There's a lot of selection here as well. Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, also not necessarily in all of these decks, but included it here in this example deck list because it has so much synergy with Winding Constrictor, with Rishkar. Just an excellent addition to the deck, and particularly good at the mirror match from what I've heard talking to players here this weekend.
That -2 ability where you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature gets kind of out of hand, whether you're being able to generate mana with Rishkar or putting double the counters on because of Winding Constrictor.
Yep, or imagine you make a couple plants, then you put some +1/+1 counters on them, then you play Rishkar after that, now your plants are tapping for mana. There's all kinds of crazy things you can do here.
And of course, Verdurous Gearhulk.
Right, the star of the show here, just raw power, one of the best 5-drops in the format. Again, distributing +1/+1 counters, gets powered up by Winding Constrictor, works with Walking Ballista, and so on and so forth. So you can really see this kind of like entangled web of synergy in this deck.
All right, let's keep moving on through the list here, and we see another new card from Aether Revolt, possibly the card that's going to have the most impact on the most formats in Magic from this set.
Yeah, Fatal Push is a card people have been talking about in all formats, from Modern, even possibly in Legacy as well, but definitely makes an impact here in Standard. Particularly good in mirror matches, takes out opposing Walking Ballistas no matter how big they are, takes out Winding Constrictor, can even be powered up to take out something bigger occasionally. And then you can see the rest of the sort of utility spells here. Again, a lot of flexibility here. Grasp of Darkness, one of the more potent black removal spells in the environment, and Oath of Nissa, able to kind of give you some card selection, maybe find your Walking Ballista, find your Winding Constrictor, or fix your mana a little bit for playing Nissa.
Of course, you see a single copy of Tireless Tracker. A little opportunity to customize what you do in this deck, and there's some slots to play around with.
Yeah, often people will mix and match some number of Tireless Trackers pre-sideboard and some post-sideboard, bringing them in for the more grindy matchups, maybe trying to win a mirror match or out-card advantage a control deck.
So now, how do you make this all work? I mean, we've seen a couple decks here that are kind of like, we've called them Jund Constrictor. Maybe they're splashing red to deal with the next deck we're going to talk about. But how do you make your mana work? Is it pretty straightforward in this green-black deck?
It's pretty straightforward. Your options are fairly limited. We'll take a look at the mana base, coming up here. But yeah, you've got your Hissing Quagmire, your black-green fast land. Sometimes you can play Evolving Wilds to help fix a little bit. But the mana is definitely not perfect in a deck like this, even though you're only 2 colors.
Sure.
Especially if you're trying to play, for example, Gifted Aetherborn, which is black on turn 2, Grasp of Darkness, also double black, and then also playing, Nissa, Voice of Zendikar.
There's a particular land I want to ask you about. Let's see if we can get the graphic up for that. A single copy of Evolving Wilds, is that something that you have there that's in this deck for a card like Fatal Push, so you can turn on Revolt, at not ideally, but at instant speed?
Partially, yes. It's also just sort of the next best dual land that you have access to in many ways. You could play Foul Orchard. It's just to enter the battlefield tapped and tap for either colors. But again, yeah, because of the synergy with Fatal Push in particular, Evolving Wilds is often the choice for kind of maybe your 9th or 10th dual lands here.
So 25 lands is about where you want to be on this deck?
Yeah, generally. There's different flavors slightly, but generally it's a 24, 25 land deck. Yep.
Okay. So that was week 1. That won the first Star City Open. Actually, a friend of mine, Brennan, built this deck. He'd been touting Walking Ballista all along, and he basically got a good 2 weeks of neener out of that deck.
And was he the player that won actually back-to-back opens, I think?
Yeah, he did.
Really impressive.
Yeah.
He sort of had a called shot, if I recall correctly, like, my deck's awesome, I'm going to do awesome with it, and then he did awesome.
Yeah, he was, I mean, I was texting with him throughout that tournament, and he felt like, wow, this is my weekend. I feel really good about this deck. So,
and it was certainly an excellent choice, and continues to be an excellent choice.
And really threw a hand grenade into the metagame right on week 1. Now, even before week 1, people were talking about our next deck, this copycat deck, the Jeskai deck with Saheeli Rai and Felidar Guardian. This combo. Why don't we start out by explaining how the combo works if people aren't familiar with it?
Absolutely. So Saheeli Rai, powerful planeswalker. Her -2 ability is the one that we're really looking at here. Makes a copy of a creature artifact that sort of lasts until the end of the turn. Now, the way that combos with Felidar Guardian is when Felidar Guardian enters the battlefield, it can blink any of your permanents out and back onto the battlefield. And by doing so, that permanent sort of returns refreshed, right? It returns untapped if it was a land, or if it was, say, an Oath of Jace, you'll get to enter the battlefield trigger again. But in this particular case, you're actually blinking your Saheeli Rai off the battlefield and back onto it, and then she'll come back as sort of a new game object. She comes back with 3 loyalty, and her ability hasn't been used yet because she's sort of a new object here. So what you can do is, if you have the Felidar Guardian on the battlefield, you play Saheeli Rai, you use her -2, you create a new copy of Felidar Guardian. When that enters the battlefield, you target your Saheeli Rai, remove her from the battlefield, she comes back again with 3 loyalty, and now you can use her -2 ability again, and loop that over and over again. And each time you do that, you're creating a new 1/4 Felidar Guardian, and Saheeli gives them all haste as well. So in the end, you can make, say, 17 million cats.
I believe that was the number yesterday.
And crash in for, an arbitrarily large amount of damage.
Now, it is a disruptible combo?
It is, yeah. There are a number of ways to disrupt it. You can play a creature removal spell and take out the Felidar Guardian.
So crack your Evolving Wilds and Fatal Push the Felidar Guardian?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely one of the ways. Or the other common way is to be able to deal damage to the Saheeli Rai before she's able to blink off the battlefield and back on. So if it's a freshly played Saheeli Rai from the hand, she'll enter with 3 loyalty, and then her -2 ability is usually what starts off the combo. She'll be left in a window with 1 loyalty for a little while while you can respond. And so we've seen players using things like Walking Ballista to ping her for 1 damage. We've seen Shock. We've even seen the Red Implement. The name escapes me right now, but being able to deal 1 damage. So basically any way you can deal at least 1 damage is a potential way to disrupt the combo, at least if it's coming fresh out of your opponent's hand.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that's been, I know, anytime you have a combo, people are a little, like, oh no. But Saheeli Rai actually does some really cool things with other cards in the deck too. One of the things that's let this evolve into a control deck more than just a combo deck is, like the Torrential Gearhulk.
Right.
You'll see people be able to sort of say, well, you know what? I'm going to let you live in terror of my combo. But I'm just going to grind the game out with Torrential Gear Hulk. I'm going to get some value. Maybe I'll play my Saheeli Rai and I'll blink my Gear Hulk, and then I'll get another free instant out of my graveyard and just kind of like eat away at you. And you're kind of scared to do anything because if you tap out, then you just you're going to get overrun by an army of cats.
Yeah, definitely true. A large part of the strength of the combo is actually just the threat of the combo, because there's so many different tricks you can do. You can actually, if you're just starting your turn with 5 lands on the battlefield, you can actually represent a lethal combo, even with no other permanents, because you could untap, draw, play your 6th land, play the Felidar Guardian, blink one of your lands, comes back untapped. Now you have 3 more mana to play Saheeli, and then off you go from there.
Right.
So anytime you have 5 lands on the battlefield, your opponent has to fear that combo.
I thought one of the things that we saw yesterday that was super interesting is almost like this next level version of the combo that didn't have the combo.
Version of the control deck.
The version of the control deck, yeah. It just played the Jeskai control shell and basically got the advantage early on of people having to respect the combo. You see your opponent playing these lands, playing, Torrential Gear Hulk and, maybe Glimmer of Genius or something like that. And you're like, okay, I know what this person's on, and I have to behave differently than I might in a matchup against a classic control deck where maybe you want to jam in very early and kind of put them under a lot of pressure.
Yeah, absolutely true. Remember, players don't exchange deck lists at the beginning of the tournament. They're not made public. So for the first several rounds of the tournament, especially on day 1, your opponent doesn't know what you're playing. So if they just see, sort of red, white, and blue colored lands, and you're playing a slower game, and maybe you're playing some Anticipates and Glimmer of Genius for card selection, they have to fear the combo. And we've seen players just abuse that fear, that paranoia, by not even playing the combo at all and just playing a traditional control game.
I think we'll see a lot of sideboard jockeying as this standard metagame evolves, where people are siding the combo in or out, or maybe having the combo in their sideboard and bringing it in for game 2, or vice versa.
Or trimming some of the combo out so your opponent still has to respect it, but not leaning as heavily on that as your win condition.
You don't have to 4 and 4 it. You can play a smaller package of that. All right, let's take a look at some more of the cards that make this deck work, that help you dig to your combo and keep everything going. Talk about this package here.
Yeah, so these are kind of the card selection cards here, and again, there's a lot of flexibility. Glimmer of Genius, a card that works really, really well with Torrential Gear Hulk. End your opponent's turn, flash in a Gear Hulk, get 4 mana worth of card selection and value at instant speed. Anticipate, just a great card, kind of fills in your curve, lets you do something early. I particularly like the inclusion of Nahiri the Harbinger in this list. She gives you card flow with her +2 ability, and also lets you get rid of redundant combo pieces or search for the piece that you need, and just a lot of utility from that card there, as well as another threat that your opponent has to sort of answer on board, maybe ties up their mana, spending time answering it. And then Oath of Jace kind of represents, I've seen a number of different lists playing kind of all the oaths under the sun, right? Because they're just great permanents to blink with the Felidar Guardian and get extra value. And Oath of Jace in particular gives you that great card selection.
Right. So yeah, you when it comes into play, you get to draw 3 cards. Those are magic words to any Magic player.
Oh yeah.
And if you get to reuse it, like we talked about the Glimmer of Genius, you get to reuse it with the Felidar Guardian. It gives you something to do also when you don't line up all your combo pieces and you're digging and digging. So that's really a nice little piece here. All right, so let's talk about some more cards here. We talked earlier about Shock as a weapon against this deck. We see Shock is included in some of these lists made deck.
Yeah, Shock's a really multifaceted card in this metagame. Normally it's a card that's best at dealing with early creatures, like say, a Mardu Vehicles deck, or, taking out like an early Walking Ballista or whatever. But here it also does double duty, guarding against opposing copycat combos. So it's a card that, while it might have lived in your sideboard in other formats, you're actually happy main decking it here because it's just kind of good against everything in the metagame.
Harness Lightning, not very good traditionally at breaking up the combo, right?
Right.
You don't have quite enough energy to take out the Felidar
Guardian. Can't hit players and therefore can't hit planeswalkers, and it's a little awkward to hit the Felidar Guardian as well.
Yeah, you need some other energy source to do that.
Yep, and then just rounding things out, these are all kind of flex slots as well, but usually these Jeskai copycat control decks play some number of counter spells, negate being particularly important for kind of fighting wars over your combo.
Okay, and again, you know, we see not 4 ofs in a lot of slots, but you have the opportunity also, you know, to adjust the dials post sideboarding. On those, sometimes you'll see more negates in the sideboard, more disallows in the sideboard.
And then also Torrential Gearhulk plays into that. You kind of better off diversifying your instance so that you have a little bit more flexibility, and Torrential Gearhulk turns into like a toolbox card later on in the game.
So 3-color mana base is going to be a little trickier to navigate than a 2-color mana base like we saw with the green-white list. Talk us through this first package of lands here.
Yeah, I mean, the fast lands here, Spirebuff Canal and Inspiring Vantage, are sort of auto-includes here. Aether Hub is really nice for fixing your 3 colors. You can't lean on it too heavily because you don't have that much energy production, but it does tie in with the Glimmer of Genius and the Harness Lightning that we saw.
Yeah, I was just going to say, worth noting that with, you know, Aether Hub into Harness Lightning, you can actually take out a Felidar Guardian.
Yep, absolutely. And Needle Spires, you know, a great creature land, as is Wandering Fumarole. Can put a little pressure on your opponent in the control mirrors. You know, you're probably not dealing 20 damage with those very often, but they can threaten enemy planeswalkers. And then just rounding things out with some basic lands, making sure you have enough lands that enter the battlefield tapped later on in the game, because these are pretty mana-hungry decks.
I got tricked. This was a 2-graphic land base, so I wasn't keeping track of. I wasn't doing the math in my head. How much mana do you know? Where are you generally at with a deck like this?
So I didn't count the lands there, but roughly I would be thinking 26, 27 lands for a deck like this. Yeah,
that's what I was expecting. So now, so we saw the black green deck week 1. Now the Sea Haley Rye combo deck was a factor week 1, but really what I thought was very interesting about the week 2 version is that it was like, okay, we're a control deck ultimately. So now I know what I need to do because this is public enemy number 1, right? Like so the Jeskai deck was able to sort of make some adjustments and be able to trump that green-black deck.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing that we see in a lot of metagames is as the format evolves, the control decks actually become more popular because the metagame becomes more established, and control really thrives when you're targeting specific decks. It's very hard to make a control deck that can beat everything all at once, but when you narrow the field down to like 3 or 4 decks, then your control deck kind of, you know, it has the bullseye there for where it's aiming.
So now the control deck has the bullseye for where the pros were aiming this weekend. They said, you know, I talked to one player and he's like, you know, I'm thinking about playing the Sea Haley Rye combo. He's like, you know, I'm not happy if I'm going into a Pro Tour playing the deck that won last weekend because I feel like everybody is going to be aiming at that deck, and if there's a way to beat it, players are going to find a way to beat it. And it looks like the way players found to beat it this week was to go under. And explain what that means.
Yeah, so going under meaning coming out faster, coming straight out of the gates with aggressive creatures, putting pressure on your opponent, and then maybe throwing like a little bit of disruption in there at the end, you know, as if your opponent goes for the combo in desperation when they don't have mana to back it up with negate or something along those lines. All
right, well, let's take a look at Mardu Vehicles. This is the deck a lot of teams arrived at as that weapon to go under. Walk us through this. I could hear the shuffling of chairs in the background here as players get ready for the first round of Standard, but walk us through this.
So at its heart, this is an aggro deck. It's an artifact aggro deck, really trying to leverage Toolcraft Exemplar. So you've got, you know, Thraben Inspector giving you incidental clues, which count as artifacts, which power up the Exemplar. Pia Nalar producing Thopters, just generally a good aggressive creature that works well with your other artifacts, artifact creatures. And then Scrap Heap Scrounger, one of the major reasons for adding black to this sort of base red-white deck. Just, you know, being able to recur from the graveyard puts a lot of pressure on those control decks in the late game.
And certainly an inevitability for this deck sometimes that was really giving people fits this week, and that card was a real breakout card. Even though it's been around for a while, it really flourished in this new Standard.
Totally agree.
Let's talk about some more of the creatures in this deck. Veteran Motorist, Aether Geode Miner, and Dapala Pilot Exemplar.
Yeah, just more great creatures accruing vehicles. We'll see the vehicles in a moment here, but yeah, Veteran Motorist pumps up your vehicles, helps scry, you know, gives you card selection, and Dapala Pilot Exemplar, again, ties in the vehicle theme, pumps up your dwarfs. All the creatures on the slide are dwarves. Aether Geode Miner, a card that some people are using kind of just to fill in the 2 slot. It's not one of the premium ones, but it's one of the ones that gets the job done.
It is something that can crew 2 vehicles in one turn, though.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting. Right? I wonder how much that comes up.
You can crew a vehicle, blink it out, it comes back into play untapped, crew another vehicle.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Damn, and it definitely came up yesterday during the Standard rounds. I saw someone doing that, so you know, pretty exciting. Okay, so you know, we call this deck Mardu Vehicles. Where are the vehicles, Ian? What are they? Let's take a look.
So here we have Cultivator's Caravan and Heart of Kirin. And what really stands out to me is 4 copies of Heart of Kirin, even though it's a legendary vehicle and it's pretty resilient. You know, that to me says this card's just awesome. And I was, chatting with Sam Party earlier yesterday, and he said, yeah, this is just like the reason to play the deck. It's super awesome, really powerful. If it survives, your opponent's probably dead, so you don't really care if you have redundant copies. And it plays really, really well with Gideon, ally of Zendikar, which we're going to see coming up here.
All right, let's take a look at some more of the cards here. Unlicensed Disintegration, and of course you mentioned Gideon.
Yeah, Gideon, just one of the most powerful cards in Standard, hands down. Works really well in this deck. You can do all sorts of tricks, from making Gideon into a creature, using him to crew a vehicle, then minus loyalty to crew the Heart of Kirin. You can even do that on your opponent's turn. Really, really flexible card. Produces extra 2/2 tokens, which can also crew vehicles.
I like that Unlicensed Disintegration works attacks on 2 fronts against the combo.
Yeah, you can kill both the Felidar Guardian and the Saheeli in one fell swoop there. And this to me is the other major reason for playing black in this deck.
Of course, and of course Shock we've talked about already.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about tying this deck together with the mana, and I'll keep track this time. I'll do the count as we go. So 16 lands here. What's going on?
So again, fast lands, just super awesome in a low to the ground aggro deck like this. And then the one that stands out to me, a new card from Aether Revolt, Spire of Industry. If you're playing with artifacts, this is like a super City of Brass, a super mana confluence, where if you don't need the colored mana, you can tap it pain-free for a colorless. But if you do, pay 1 life, add any mana, any color of mana to your mana pool.
Okay, let's take a look at the rest of the lands, and then we see 23 lands in the deck: Needle Spires, Aether Hub, and Plains. So these are basically the 3 decks to beat in this format. Would you say that that's still true?
Yes, these are the big 3 of the tournament, each one representing around 20% of the metagame, sort of depending on how you count and group things together. They are the big 3 decks at this tournament, hands down.
Which one would you pick if you're going to FNM next week?
Probably Mardu Vehicles, I think. Just kind of straightforward. I like attacking with creatures. Gives you a lot of flexibility out of the sideboard. We saw some blue lands there, which you can use your imagination what those are for, but gives you some extra flexibility.